Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m. here in the building and out there in cyberspace, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, not on LinkedIn. Wherever you want to be, just join us here for an hour or so. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I am the studio's creative technologist. I'm a white man with long brown hair and a beard, slightly bald on top. I'm wearing blue jeans and a pale brown wool jumper. So these lunchtime talks are part of our Open Studio Friday offer. Every Friday we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and offer you the chance to spend some time in the space. You can hot desk alongside our residents and staff, and also you can hear more from the people who are part of our community or find out about some new projects made by people who are working on things that excite us. Talks cover everything from innovative research in the fields of creativity and technology, projects in progress, things that are needing feedback, questions, and curious minds. And as part of Open Studio Friday, we offer you all the opportunity to come and hot desk us with us from 10 a.m. through to 5 p.m. Now, can I see, is there anyone here who's new to the studio, first times? Yeah, we got quite a few. Well, big welcome to all of you. And any of you online who are also putting your hands up, weirdly. So for those of you who've heard this bit before, you might want to take a moment to share the link to this talk online, stick it out on your socials, get it out to the world. The more people we got, the better. So for the rest of you though, what is the Pervasive Media Studio? The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy and coding to product development and performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. We're a home for embryonic ideas, research and development, and the building of new companies, and we're a meeting place for the creative and commercial industries. We offer studio space, the space we're in right now, desk space, meeting rooms, events, opportunities for our residents as part of our spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. We're also a space for people to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. Now, a quick bit of housekeeping. Feel free to move around, make a cup of tea, grab a glass of water from the kitchen. Please don't run the microwave, it messes with stuff. We have a quiet space just to the left in here, so if you need to take a break at any point, you can just hop in there. Fire exits are at either end of the studio. In the unlikely event that you're going to need them, one of the studio team will direct you to them. And accessible toilets and baby change are in the corridor next to the kitchen. Now, a captioned version of this talk will be available online after the talk is finished. If you're watching online now and you want subtitles, you need to go to the Facebook stream, not the Twitter or the YouTube. You can just find that, go to Facebook and type in Pervasive Media Studio. There'll be a Q&A at the end of the talk. For those of you watching online, you can pop your questions into YouTube or tweet us at PM Studio UK. If you're in the building, you can just stick your hand up. Before we start, next week's talk is by our very own Tony Bajam and Helen Jaffa. They'll be talking about the work they've done recently to reimagine how we do recruitment at Watershed, how we've tried to make things more inclusive, and the parts that maybe still need work on that. You can get news on all of the future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. Or you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, or you can subscribe to the newsletter on our website. Even better, do all of those things. Spend your afternoon just smashing those buttons. For now, though, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. This time, lunchtime talk is by long-standing resident Duncan Speman, who has been hiding behind a lectern here. Duncan, by the way, gave the first ever lunchtime talk many, many years ago, so we're delighted to have him back. In this talk, Duncan will present new methods for understanding how people experience immersive artworks, and we'll look at how sound and augmented reality offer new insights and responses to climate collapse. So I'm going to hand over to Duncan.
Thank you. Hi. Oh. Yeah, it's good. Do the applause now rather than at the end. I'm Duncan Speman. I'm a white man in my 40s with a short beard, glasses and shaved head, and I'm dressed all in black so that you all know I'm an avant-garde sound artist. So what I'm going to be talking about today is quite niche, and I hope it has some kind of resonances for other people. A lot of this is the outcome of my PhD research that I sort of dragged myself through over the last 5 years. And I hope that you're all looking forward to an afternoon of conceptual Swedish geography, because that's what I'm going to be trying to make quite exciting for you. But essentially what I want to talk mainly about is that I make immersive experiences that tend to involve locative media. So they tend to involve experiences where I invite audiences to move through uncontrolled environments, so through cities, towns, buildings, hearing different bits of audio content or any forms of other digital content tied to specific geographic locations. So this isn't Pokemon Go, it's much more melancholic and sad and reflective. It's also, I don't really make kind of history walks that you know, tell you this building's been here this long and so-and-so lived there. I'm always trying to make experiences that get people to engage with the environments they're in, to reflect on your position in the environment. But it does connect to a lot of different types of media and experiences that people make. But one of the things that always struck me was I come from a background of music and composition. And I think that time is really important. And I'm going to be talking about time a lot this afternoon, and we can have the philosophical debates about time at the end of the talk. But essentially, time in these experiences, for me, I always felt that that arc of the experience, that you begin an experience, you get your mobile smartphone, you put your headphones on, it begins and you carry on through this journey, through the city, hearing all these different things or experiencing these different bits of content. But the issue for me was that in a lot of pieces that I experienced, there was quite often, there seemed to be this disconnect. There wasn't this idea that it was a continuous journey. So the experience felt very broken up. You'd get somewhere, you'd experience something, and then the next one would be sort of over by that building, so you'd trundle off to that building and you'd experience something. And to sort of explain that in musical terms, it kind of felt like this. So you'd be there, you'd be walking along, and then you'd be in another bit.
Systematically and vigorously,
and then you'd be back. And it would just feel, for me, very broken up and not kind of continuous. And I wanted something that used the arcs of kind of music and sound, tension and release, like how long it takes to get somewhere. And you're walking from one point to another, being part of that experience. So I was making numerous kinds of pieces, and I decided to start making some new ones for my PhD. And the first piece I made was called It Must Have Been Dark By Then. And it was a work that involved a smartphone and a book. Oh, this is not very good, is it? Physical and digital together. The audience was invited to take a walk. I had travelled actually with Sarah Zoltash, who's here, to a number of different places in the world that were experiencing different kinds of disappearance, disappearing land, disappearing people. And I wanted to connect those stories to the places that the audience would hear about them in. So the way the piece worked was that you would be invited to, for example, find some water. And when you were at the water, you would hear field recordings from that location, and you would read a description, a sort of travel journal of our experiences by that water. And it would carry on like this through different points around the city. But what I was struggling with was how to kind of analyze what was happening for the audiences, because I couldn't be there with them. I couldn't really know what was happening in the experience. So actually composing it was quite a complex thing. And also, I didn't know how long it was going to take someone to get from one place to another, because I didn't know where each location would be. So I Googled time and geography, because that's how you do PhD research, and it turns out there's a whole field of knowledge called time geography, which is great. So about time geography. Is that because I just said Google? That's brilliant. Well, whoever got that could read out the description of time geography. No. So time geography is a school of thinking that came out of Norway from a researcher called Torsten Hagenstrand, and I've probably pronounced that incorrectly. So I want to kind of explain what time geography is and why it was really useful for what I was doing. So to start with, time geography makes a set of assumptions, and some of these kind of might seem quite obvious, but they kind of become useful. So the assumptions, there's a whole bunch of assumptions, but these are three really important ones. The indivisibility of the human being. You can only be in one place at one time. Every task has a duration. Everything you want to do takes time. And movement between points in space takes time. Now these things are sort of, they might seem quite obvious, but where it becomes useful is when you start analysing like the things you do in your life around this way. So a lot of the early research in time geography was looking at sort of issues around things like school closures and bus routes, because in rural areas of Sweden, if they closed one school, that would mean it was further for some people to go to take their children to a school, which then might not time in with the current bus timetables, because the bus arrives at a certain point, which you were used to, and then you can't take your kids to swimming, and everything kind of interlocks. But to understand this, to kind of look at it, they started developing different kinds of notation. So the most famous kind of notation is the time cube. So the most simple time cube is like this. So time goes upwards, and this square represents geographic space. So this represents a journey from home to the doctor's office to work. And each of those things takes time. But it also, you might be waiting at home. We'll come to that in a minute. But you're at home for a bit. You take this journey to the doctor's office. You're at the doctor's office for a bit. Then you go over to work. And then when you start sort of combining the fact that lots of different things have different routes in time. So this is thinking about car accidents through time geography. So here we have the warehouse with a van leaving it. We have a child's home and school. The child's going from home to school. And there's a department store here. There's going to be a point in the day when all those three things meet. So this is the most likely time there's going to be an accident, and that kid is going to be hit by the truck. So you start to understand the kind of way patterns and things interlink with each other. And through this, I started sort of thinking, oh yeah, this is kind of interesting. I can start looking at the roots of the people experiencing my work in this kind of time cube way. So what I did to start with was I just gave people GPS trackers while they were doing the pieces, so I could actually just track their movements, doing the work. So, that's on the wrong screen. So what I could do is start looking at people's journeys and start seeing them in time and space. But the nice thing with this is you can start looking at it from different directions. So you can look at it very much as this is just their journey in time, but you can also look at it as how far they traveled in space, or combinations of the two. And then you can start comparing different people's experiences. So what I was able to do then was start understanding that two people doing the experience might take a very similar amount of time to do the experience, but they might walk very different lengths of geographic routes. So they might have a very different experience physically in the world than they might over time. And so doing this allowed me to kind of start understanding the way the pieces worked. But it was also important to take some other ideas from time geography, which were the way that they describe all these different things. So I'm going to, ooh, that's annoying, that's come up there again. What was the way to get that back, Martin?
Hold your mouse at the bottom of the screen.
Ah, thank you very much. So, All right. So I'll just bring in a different version of this. So there's a bunch of different sort of bits of language in time geography. So the route that someone takes or a thing takes, and this can be anything, it doesn't just have to be a person. This table here has had a journey through time and space, and it begins at some point. My journey through time and space began in Ascot in 1976, and it's the only place in the world I can never go to more times than I left it. This is a path, so they call this the path. A point where you stop, a location that you mark, is called a station. And stations exist in time. So if I return to the same place, it hasn't just appeared again. It's still been there all the time. Now, these kind of things seem obvious when you think about them. Of course, the building's still there when you go back to it. But what's important to remember, and this will all sort of come together, is that the building has stayed there and it's had its own life carrying on while you weren't there. The other concept that time geography presents that's really, really important is the idea of constraints. So this is me walking through the city. I can only walk at the speed I can walk at. I can't go as fast as a car. I can't go fast as a bicycle. So I have a constraint in terms of my capacity for moving. So capacity constraints is one of the core ideas of time geography, that if someone needs to travel by car because the time difference, if someone needs to get somewhere really quickly, it depends whether they can walk it, they can take a bus, they can take a car, those things sort of play into it. But then you have authority constraints, which are, I might not be allowed into certain places at certain times. So a public park might not be open between 6 in the evening and 6 in the morning. So then suddenly there's another constraint on where I can move to and what I can do. So in that car crash example, you could think about, well, we could add in constraints and make sure that trucks aren't allowed to drive through this point between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, because that's when the children's paths all go through it. But then you have coupling constraints, and coupling constraints are that you have to be in a certain place at a certain time. So if you need to get a bus, you need to be at the bus stop when the bus arrives. So all these kind of limitations start becoming, I'll just put those up so they all start playing into how I might be structuring an experience for people walking through the city. Because what I want to do is I want to give them a journey, and I want to know where they can and can't go, and I want to know sort of what that arc of that experience is, whether it's going to take them a long time to get to one point, whether there's going to be a sort of risk that, oh, they can't go to this place at this part of the, at this point in the day. So by kind of starting to make these maps and trying to analyze the where people go and what those different constraints are, it started to become possible to understand how people move through time and space together. But this becomes a challenge because there's a set of other, there's a set of other things that start appearing here. One of the things I realized was that it allowed me to see where people went and measure their time. And this is one of time geography's assumptions, is that time is measurable. But we all have different experiences of time. We have personal, individual experiences of time. For you, this talk may seem like it's gone on for 2 hours already. For other people, it might seem like it's whizzed by in a couple of minutes. So we have the sort of time we can measure, which is this is showing us, but we also have the time we experience and the time that we feel. This has been kind of explored through hundreds of years of philosophy in various different ways. And I am not going to open up that entire debate. Where's my picture gone? But I'm going to simplify it into these two ideas of chronos and kairos. So chronos is measurable time. It's what you can look at on your watch. It's what you can sort of say, this person took this long to get somewhere. But kairos is what you experience. It's how you, technically it means it's the right moment to do something. But we can think about it as feeling it's the right moment, feeling something's taking longer, how you imagine time passing. And so I wanted to kind of get inside people's experiences, and I was kind of struggling about how I'd get inside people's experiences. So what I started doing was I stole some ideas from Christine Jorgensen, who is a games researcher. She researches video games. And she had been doing work where she'd been filming people playing the games and then watching the videos back with them. So I started doing this. I started sending people out on these walks with a small camera attached to their chest. It would record their journey. When they came back, I would watch back the footage with them and interview, and they would, not interview them in the sense of I wouldn't ask them questions, I would just ask them to describe what happened based on watching the video. This was really important because when you ask someone what happened, when you ask someone to describe something, they tend to change the order of things because our memories aren't perfect. You know, our memories don't act like a video recorder, and not that video recorders are perfect. But we will emphasize different things from different points. We will, we might recall things in a different order. Something will suddenly come back to us. And that wasn't that useful for me because I wanted to know what was happening for them at this point in the journey. But by having the video, sitting down with them and watching the video, I could do this interview. They could tell me what happened, and it would be kind of chronologically correct as best as I could. And then by doing this with lots of different people, I could start comparing what was happening for people at the same point in the experience. So what would happen then is I would end up with huge spreadsheets of interviews, and these were kind of marked off in time. So this is what everyone was talking about at the beginning of their journey. This is what everyone talked about at 30 seconds in, 1 minute, 1 minute, 32 minutes. So I'm sending people off on individual, isolated experiences. I can't be there. But by doing this, I start to get a sense of what the shared kind of commonalities were between them. So, for example, here, I could start noticing that at 5 minutes in, all these different people were talking about their feet and the sense of walking. And I could see that, oh, there's something happening in the work here that's leading a lot of people to talk about the same thing. So I could start understanding, without being there, what was happening at certain moments in the piece. And then what I can do is, once I have those interviews, I can start looking at them alongside the GPS data and the sort of the Chronos data. So then I start ending up in this position where you've got sort of measurable Chronos time, but you've also got people's different experiences and sort of personal understanding of what was happening for them in those moments. And that allowed me to kind of get this picture and to try and get inside the experience, because everyone makes a path. We cannot help but make a path through space-time, but people are not paths. So that marking, that recording of your journey through space and time does not describe your experience of it. So I was trying to find this way to bring both of these together. And the system of sort of putting a video recorder on someone is problematic in many different ways. One person who went out to do it, they were out walking and a fight started in the street, and they were kind of in this position of like, should I be filming this? I've got this camera on me. Should I be sort of evidencing this, or should I be documenting this piece? So there's loads of challenges with it, but it sort of ended up being really useful for me. And it allowed me to kind of, I'm not going to go into all the different revelations around the composition that came out of this, but I will say that one of the things that was kind of amazing was the impact of rhythm and timing of the sound and the music on people's choices that they made. So what I started seeing was that people weren't talking about it in their interviews. They weren't consciously experiencing it, but they were all making decisions at the same moment in time. And the only thing that was kind of shaping that was the arc of the music. So what it allowed me to do, not scientifically, it's not a point where I can come and say, if you play this drum beat with this chord, the piece will last 3 minutes and people will decide to go to Subway. It's not that kind of scientific, but it does give me as a maker a sort of guidance to how I might shape the work. Yes, where was I next? So I was kind of tapping into this into people's experiences and then talking about time. And in parallel, there was something else happening in the work. So I'd made this initial piece looking at disappearance and looking at people, places in the world that were changing. And originally, the work was about just disappearance and different kinds of disappearance. So it was about population decrease in Latvia, it was about water disappearing in Tunisia, and it was about land disappearing in Louisiana through rising water. And almost unsurprisingly, going to those places, I was very rapidly confronted with the impact of human activity on those environments. And the piece sort of became about climate change and climate collapse. And it also, as I started looking at what people were experiencing, people were talking a lot about change and climate change in the environments they were experiencing the works in. So what was happening is they might be in Bristol, they might be hearing about what was happening with rising sea levels in Louisiana, and they would come back reflecting on the future of Bristol and the future of where they were. So this started kind of bringing me back to this idea of what happens to places. So they might come to some place in Bristol and they're hearing about somewhere else, because essentially that place has a history and it has a future as well that carries on outside of the experience. So what was happening was that people were starting to think about the future of somewhere, not just it at that point you were there. They were conscious of the change in a place, and they were conscious of what might happen in the future. And of course, I'm going the wrong way. Their path would then also carry on into the future. And I started thinking about the fact that layers of time were happening. So while you were experiencing these works, you were having that bit of journey from here when you start the artwork to here when you finish the artwork. But at the same time, you were kind of experiencing this longer time scale, that you were thinking about the future and past of a place. You were also hearing recordings from another place in the past that were the impact of long histories, but also might be where it's going in the future. So there was this thing that was happening where people were experiencing multiple timescales simultaneously. And one of the most common kind of descriptions of how we might understand climate collapse and how we might understand our relationship to planetary change is the understanding that we live on multiple timescales simultaneously, that we're not just living within our lifespans, that every moment we are living within geological timescales, within microbial timescales, and that things that we do now the impacts of those will last well into the future. And we are right now living with the impacts of things that have been done well into the past. So understanding these kind of the fact that we were living in different levels of time, I was like, well, this is a really nice kind of concept. But actually what seemed to be happening was that these works where you're experiencing locations and content from the past and thinking about your future were giving you a tangible experience of those environments. But I was making people wear headphones, and through doing that, I was kind of isolating them from the actual sound world they were in. So I was bringing them these sounds from other places, but I was cutting them off from where they were right now. So I made a sister piece called Only Expansion. And in Only Expansion, rather than just having headphones, this work has headphones with microphones on the outside. And the microphones on the outside of the headphones pick up the sound around the audience. So while you're listening to it, you might hear those same recordings from rising sea levels somewhere, but then you can also hear the city around you in real time. And then the software in the box will start processing that sound around you to simulate or evoke different kinds of climate collapse. So it might sort of make the city sound like it's underwater and the sea levels are rising around you. So in that moment, you're having this kind of blurring between the now, what you're experiencing, the past of somewhere else that's already had its sea levels rising, and your potential future as you hear what it might be like. And these are all happening around you immediately. And this idea of being entangled with your environment became really important with the sound, because when you think about sound in relation to visual imagery, one of the things about sound is that it happens in the room, or it happens where you're listening to it. So a soundscape right now, you're listening to my voice, but as you're hearing my voice, you're also hearing the rustling of your clothes, your seats moving. They're all one thing. You're contributed to this soundscape as well. And if I bring in this sound into the room, this is just part of the soundscape as well. So this is a recording from somewhere else, but it's all becoming merged into one thing, and we're all sort of interacting with it. And this, for me, felt like a really clear and core way to experience our entanglement with the environment through an artwork. Rather than just showing you something, you were actually part of it, and having the microphones on the outside of the headphones allowed you to do that. And so by this point, what was happening was that you were having this kind of experience of imagining different horizons of time, essentially. You were imagining the right now, you're imagining the future and the past. And I realized that you could actually start thinking about that as a way to compose the work. You could start thinking about changing people's kind of temporal horizon as a way of, if you think about like a zoom lens on a camera, so rather than just doing a big wide shot and then a close-up, what I was trying to do was wide shots and close-ups in time. And it allowed me to start thinking about, this is a brilliantly complex diagram. It allowed me to start thinking about the composition of a work as a sort of close-up or wideness of time. So this is the way I was kind of scoring the actual artwork, so that the experience for the audience starts here and goes this way. And at the beginning, they're somewhere where they've probably been before. So they're in Bristol, and they've got this location, this station, but as I said, it has a history. So they've already, looking back, they might have been there themselves. They might have a personal connection to that location. So the piece kind of starts looking back on your personal life. And then it starts presenting you these possible futures. And then it starts pushing your vision of time out into the future. And it shrinks and contracts and shrinks and contracts. And similar to a musical score, I can kind of start shaping that and think about an arc over the work that does that. So it becomes, rather than composing just with the kind of the sound, you're actually sort of composing with someone's kairos, someone's experience of time, and you're measuring it out over Chronos through the city. I don't even know if it works, but I started doing it, and it seems to work, because when you start looking at the interviews, you start, and you look at them along those graphs, you start seeing that people are talking about now and their personal history, and then they're talking about the future, and then they're talking about these kind of imagined futures. So it does sort of work, but again, I'm not desperately trying to prove anything. And there is a there is a last thing that I'd like to sort of talk about in terms of where this entangled sound works for me in terms of thinking about ecology and climate collapse, and that is about how sound is quite a visceral thing, but sound is also quite ambiguous. The idea that sound is full of experiences like what is that sound? You know, what is making that sound? This is ice singing in a melting glacier, and this sense of both the unknown, but also the things that are very unhuman. These other sounds are recorded by Janne Winderin in a glacier in Norway. It's a mixture of animal life and water and all kinds of things. I can't remember the list. And for me, this idea that sound exists, I'm trying to remember the end of my talk now. These sounds, the fact that they're sort of unknown and very unhuman, they kind of remind us that sounds and the world doesn't really care about the play of human drama, that these things kind of exist. And I always find myself returning to Kangis's idea that what it does is it reminds us that the world is not for humans, the world is rather with humans. And I think by creating experiences that allow this sort of entanglement, this blurring between you, your environment, the future and the past and time, you allow an experience of something that's quite conceptually hard to understand. So I'm gonna stop there and go to questions, because I think there's probably going to be lots of things I'm going to need to explain more.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Does anyone have a question? Stick your hand up. Go for it.
The technology that you created, did you say it essentially changes the ambient sound?
Yes.
What is it? So how does that? Do you know how that all works? Or?
So it's inside the box is a small computer running audio software, and it's kind of the same things you do if you were just sitting there changing the EQ on sounds and adding effects and reverb and sort of manipulating it, but it's doing it in real time on the mics. So as the sound comes in, it's kind of filtering it and changing it and processing it.
Do you have you predetermined the sounds that you're essentially going to change?
No, so the sounds that are changed are whatever's happening around people at that moment. But those kind of composition arcs, what happens with those is that by kind of looking at when things happen where, I kind of say, okay, in this section I want it to be very underwatery, or I want it to sound like a desert, and so I'll choose, okay, and I want that to happen for 5 minutes. So it has a sort of score going through the work that changes it over time.
Thanks. So I'm wondering, in the kind of, there's like one part where it seems like you're wanting to enhance the psycho-emotional experience that the participant is having, and then there's another side as an artist that you want them to have the experience that you want them to have. And I wonder how much, what the considerations between those two things, if you could just speak about that a bit.
Yeah, it's the biggest nightmare. And actually, this sort of brings in one of the core revelations, actually. So the first piece was, I wanted people to have agency over choosing the sites, because I wanted people to have that moment of finding a station, somewhere that means something to them. And I didn't want to prescribe where those places were that they go to, because I wanted them to have that feeling of memory. So that had to be open, and so I couldn't prescribe where they went. And that led me to this problem of, but then I don't know how long it's going to take them to get there. So then how do I give that some shape? How do I give that some musical shape? What I found was, by doing those measurements and realizing that the musical shapes I was putting in there in the first experiments, everyone ended up taking the same amount of time. So there was this thing that started happening where, even though they had totally free rein to go wherever they wanted, everyone was essentially coming back at the same moment. So these two people, they took very different routes to different places, but they took the same amount of time, even to the point where that point there, where those two lines cross over, that's the point in the journey where they turn around and come back. All those could have happened at any point in the experience. This person could have taken 10 minutes, this person could have taken an hour, but they didn't. They somehow, the music really shaped their journey. So I thought, well, this is great, because actually, maybe I don't need to leave that kind of open. So in the second piece with the headphones, that score is actually fixed. You don't know it's fixed, but it's fixed. And it says, go and try and find some water, or try and find a building. And because what I learned with this one was that you can sort of shape the audio in certain ways, and you can create patterns, people get used to a feeling of rhythm. There's something called entrainment, where you basically fall into step with something. So by structuring the work in these repeated rhythms, people would feel, oh, I should probably have chosen somewhere by now. So then you end up in this sort of balance between, I'm getting to write the sound structure and the arc and the builds and the tension and release that I want, but the audience is getting that agency to choose their routes. And it plays against each other. It doesn't always work, and sometimes people feel frustrated, or they're like, oh, I wanted to get there, or I didn't want to do that. But yeah, at the moment what I've done is said, you can go where you want, but I'm only going to give you this arc to get there, and try and sort of shape it in that way.
Questions? I was just thinking about how people, I've just been to London and gone around a number of different galleries, modern conceptual art, where I might spend some time with a bit of artwork, or I might flick past just thinking, well, that's that.
Yeah.
And just the whole thing, the artist might have tried to have an intention of what I should feel, or they might not.
Yeah.
I was just wondering whether, it's very interesting that you're analysing afterwards how people have responded. Have people done that with like sort of museums and things? Put cameras on and timed people, and how do they respond to?
I imagine they have. I don't know of any specific studies for like inside museums and stuff, but I remember there being many. There's always this oft-quoted thing around sort of people spend 9 seconds in front of a painting they really like. I don't know if that's the number, and 1 second in front of one they don't. So someone must have sat there at some point counting that to get that number. But no, I don't know of inside museums.
The idea that you can really get feedback as an artist from your audience by analysing.
Yeah. But there is a. So what's interesting though is if you think about the gallery model in terms of like the things, those are the temporality. They don't have time in them in a way. I'm just talking about a painting here in a way. So it has a path like everything else, but your experience of time with it might not be as wished on by the artist, or it might be, But in these works, I do think of these kind of like pieces of music, and a piece of music has an arc. I will say, quite importantly, that this is still based quite much on kind of Western temporal structures of music. So I'm using sort of tensions and builds and releases specifically from kind of my background of writing, and it's not using different circular patterns. But what's interesting is that the paths still exist, no matter what your kind of aesthetic or cultural like writing around music is. You're still creating a path, and what your belief on time is then open.
Great. Don't forget that if you're on YouTube, you can get questions. I think we're going to grab one from YouTube and then Paul.
So Stephen.
Your name is Jane, not
YouTube. Stephen Hodge on YouTube asks, how can you map the blurring of non-present times and geographies within the time cube? Or perhaps your final diagram offers a new sort of model for doing this.
Yeah, I don't know if you can, because, and that's I guess what I was struggling with, because the time cube is very much around the measurable, and it's very much around the non-blurry, you spend this much time in this place, and it reveals lots of great stuff in terms of social planning and mobility. There's a really nice thing about it for me, that time is the most evenly shared resource in the world. Like everyone has the same amount of time. What you're having to do in that is very different, but time still just moves the same for everyone. You have 24 hours in a day, or you have, however you divide it up, is kind of up to you, but actually it's still kind of progressing. But yeah, the other this sort of arc I haven't worked out yet, because I'm done now. But how to sort of combine those two in the sense of like visually. So I'm sort of still combining these things in the sense of this is helping me think about the arc of those experiences, and then I'm having to sort of think about how that works in relation to movement through an environment. I haven't worked out how to blur them together yet, visually.
Paul, did you?
It may be that this is the same question, but phrased as Stephen's, but phrased differently. But I wanted you to, I wanted you to reflect on because you started with the time geographers talking about the indivisibility of the human being.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted you to reflect on what you've found out about that. Because it seems to me that actually your project, well, it's really makes me think a lot about how dispersed and displaced our subjectivity is, both through time and spatially through the work that you're discussing.
That's exactly that tension between the chronos and the kairos, because that assumption from time geography around the indivisibility is about trying to work out how you map and plot someone's kind of movement. So that's why it never sort of goes into that notion of kairos, of experiential time. But it's also why they kind of very clearly say that people are not paths. You know, like that path that you make is not your subjective experience. It's a way of sort of seeing what the different constraints are that allow you to be physically in different places of time. It's a very, it's like a kind of materialistic understanding of the world in that sense, of there being tasks and places and objects. But the idea that everything has a geographic position, I really like, because an idea can have a geographic position, but it can be doing that in multiple places simultaneously. But that idea might also have a path, and you could, I think, there's potentials for using that notion of time geography and movement and constraints to not look just at humans, but to look at other things as well that might not be indivisible, essentially. Does that answer that? Yes. Oh.
I think I did your own expansion piece very early on,
yes.
And I found it quite profound and emotional. That might just be me though. And I was just wondering how you looked after people afterwards, because you must have had to think about ethical considerations of people coming out of what is quite an intensive immersive experience.
Yeah. I don't care. No, it's so the with those, I think you did an interview, didn't you? Did I? I hope it wasn't too traumatic for you. But so the piece was always supposed to be quite horrific, in the sense that my aesthetic around this work was very much, I had this feeling that a lot of environmentally conscious or critical, ecological kind of artworks were very often showing us, or wildlife documentaries, all these things, showing us what we were going to lose. They were showing us the beautiful environments and the places that were going to disappear. And I'd grown up in the 80s under the shadow of potential nuclear war, and all the things that we were shown at that time were horrific. They didn't show you the nice place that was going to go when there was a nuclear war. They showed you what happened after the nuclear war, and it was traumatizing, but incredibly impactful, both around policymakers and people. So I sort of thought, I'm going to do the version of kind of climate collapse that's really grim, and not grim like Mad Max disaster movies, because they make it look really cool. And everyone's like, yeah, we want to live in the post-climate apocalypse. They look great. I want to do something that was really kind of dark and heavy, and that was kind of why I was working just with sound, because I feel you can do that with sound. But I didn't think it would affect people that much. It got more and more, and I kept having to make it more and more. If people came back and were like, it was really relaxing and meditative, I'd be like, right, I need to turn this bit up or make this. That felt like it. You know, this idea that people can interpret your artwork however you want, I'm all good with that. But I really wanted this to be heavy, and so if it was not, I'd done something wrong. But anyway, so in doing the interviews, they were very much like, this is the PhD research, and so the invitation to people was, I'm going to ask you to do this piece, and I want to do a description with you straight afterwards. That's the invite. Are you up for doing that? When the piece is being shown as an experience that people can do it, at the other point, it's kind of, go and do it, and we've got a nice, comfy, quiet room for you to sit in afterwards. Yeah.
Mandy, I think you had one?
Yeah, I think I've got a question. But first of all, a kind of tribute, actually, because an expansion changed kind of the geography of Bristol for me. I wandered up Corn Street and was thinking in the piece about sea level rise and noticed Harbour Hotel at the top of Corn Street, which actually, when you think about it, it's a slightly disturbing image. But I just remember it as I move around the city, and I guess that's the point. But my half question is this: I'm really noticing quite a few immersive projects at the moment, VR, AR. In fact, the film that was the subject of last week's talk, which was a feature film but used photogrammetry to kind of evoke deep time. So I'm noticing quite a few projects emerging recently, and I'm kind of puzzling over whether that's because these issues are hugely urgent and we need to be looking at them, and to what extent that's about the kind of affinity between immersive technology, and some of these themes. So those kind of time-based media and some of these themes. I don't know if you've got any observations on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a sort of very vague postulation that any kind of augmented experience, regardless of its content, is a fundamentally environmental work, because what it's doing is it's so when I say augmented experiences, I don't just mean visual AR, the kind of layered on Snapchat or Pokemon Go. I mean anything that's actively in its composition, its design, trying to combine digital content with, let's say, physical environments rather than real. We're not going to go there yet. But anything that's actively combining those two creates a sort of entanglement, and it creates a kind of a way of engaging with what's around you. And I think as soon as you do that, for me, that's the crux of what we've got to get to. I previously in talks always talked about the image of the lonely polar bear as being not very useful because it's so distant from you. But and you're watching it on a screen, and it doesn't have anything to do with the place you're watching it in. So I'm kind of think that if you're doing something, and that could be, what was the project in Bristol recently about all the music? Everything is Music? Is it Everything is Music? So, that's a work that's about the music history of Bristol, and you're going around and it's engaging you with place and adding content on that. It's not about climate collapse, but I would say it's a fundamentally kind of ecological piece, because what it's doing is it's forcing you to actually engage with site and place and time, which I think are all the themes that will make us kind of care about this stuff a bit more in a way. So yeah, I think they are inherently linked. That's my short answer.
All right, we've got time for one quick question. Luke.
This is new for me. I don't normally get to ask the questions. I want to come back to what you were saying on the previous question and ask you about a fellow resident is doing a PhD at the moment around kind of the enormity of climate change and the psychological impossibility of people being able to conceive it. Yeah. I know we're heading into another world crisis, but that's going to come up again. I wonder what your thoughts are on that as a problem in work when you're talking about climate change.
I think, Robert Macfarlane kind of wrote about this a while ago when he was saying that the romantic poem is not enough to deal with the enormity of the Anthropocene and climate collapse, that are existing mediums might just not be up to the task in a way. And so I think for me, one way of thinking about it is, and it kind of links to Mandy's thing, that actually maybe some of these technologies offer us ways to deal with something that maybe traditional forms don't. I sound like I'm kind of pitching a VR headset to you now, but I think, I don't know, I think what I've been trying to tap into is almost just the time aspect in a way, and even just that sense of trying to allow you to experience different timescales. That's something that's really interesting, and that's just through hearing recordings in a place where those recordings weren't made. Actually, I think it's on a basic level, that's a start. And I don't know. Yeah, I want to kind of do that tangibly somehow, because I think you can read it so very easily that we need to think about these longer timescales, but to actually kind of feel them is really hard, and I don't think I've got there yet. But that's, I guess, what I'm trying to do with these technologies, is use them as a way to sort of move in that direction. but you can also just, you know, it is a breakdown, isn't it? Like, I mean, I think there's a radio series Timothy Morton did, which is about how do we think about climate collapse without just becoming clinically depressed instantly as soon as you start thinking about it. They didn't have an answer.
Great. Well, before you go, Duncan, is there anything you would like to plug?
Oh, yes. Oh, good. Excellent. Funny you should ask. In more traditional media forms, I'm going to put a small plug out to a show at the Old Vic, opening next week, called What Remains of Us, that I've just written the music for, which is just music. It's just in a room, you watch it, and it's people act and music plays, and that's it. It's amazing. It's a story about Korean families reunited after 50 years. And then on the 26th or 5th of March, Charlie Williams and myself are performing at The Cube. He's performing his Lark Hall post-classical piano with live generated visuals. I don't know what I'm doing, playing some forest towns or something. And yeah, that's it. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
No problem.
So, before you all go, next week's talk is by our very own Tony Bajam and Helen Jaffa. They'll be talking about the work they've done recently to reimagine recruitment at Watershed, how we make that more inclusive, and the areas where we still have a bit of work to do. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk, find out more about what we do, please come and find one of the studio team. Can the studio team identify themselves? There we go. And we'll be happy to help. If you're watching online, you got any questions, drop us a line, studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Also, if you're here today, at 6 o'clock today, we've got a book launch downstairs in Studio 5. Tales of Care and Repair is a crowdsourced collection of photographs, interviews, events and stories about the objects we repair today. Should be great. If you want to do us a big favor, on your way out there is a QR code that you can scan. There's a survey you can do, gives us some data we can give to the funders, pay for more talks like this. If you're online, I believe Jade is going to drop the link, or may already have dropped the link into the chat. Great. And that's all we got. So thank you all for being here today. We'll see you all same time, same place next week.